So basically, what this is I'm writing a novel for Dark and Darker for a challenge called NaNoWriMo, and basically what that is I think it's a nonprofit organization where it's basically just a challenge to write a 50,000 word novel in the month of November. And so what I'm doing is kind of, since I'm a new writer, I'm kind of taking a more templated approach to it, like Empires of Eve, if you're not familiar with that book. Basically, the community for EVE Online went and hired someone to kind of go through the old forums and hunt people down and get some of the interesting player stories. And so I'm
Mm-hmm.
taking a similar approach to that with Dark and Darker in terms of getting content creators that I think that are interesting, them have interesting stories. Um, and so I'm really happy that you said yes to this. I have a few more people lined up, like Skinny Pete and some I think would make some interesting stories for this world.
I got
Um,
you. I got you.
Yeah, so I guess kind of like the first question is like, how did you find out about Dark and Darker? Like, did you play in the playtest at all?
Yeah, I first played around playtest 3, and the way I found out was just complete random chance. They're just somebody that I followed from another game on Twitch happened to be playing it, and I looked at it, and I remember telling my friends, I was like, "Wow!" I was like, "This game looks so bad." And then I tried it out, and then I went and told my friends again. I was like, "Yeah, this game's really, really bad, but it's really fun." And I didn't really play it that much at first. I think playtest 3 was the first time I played it, and I probably played less than 10 hours, and then I played playtest 4, and then I played playtest 5, and it went from this game's really bad but it's really fun to this game is just like one of the greatest games of all time.
I gotcha. So, out of curiosity, have you played like Tarkov or any like other similar games? Like, I've interviewed a couple of people that said that they were like Tarkov players originally and kind of just came over to this
Uh,
because it was better.
I played the Cycle Frontier a tiny bit, but no, this is really my first like extraction looter, and I've never played Tarkov.
Interesting. So, like, kind of walk me through like your initial journey through like the playtest. Were you like always a fighter main, or did you like main other classes in the early days?
Honestly, well, so pretty much in any game I've ever played, I always like playing the frontline, like tanky play style, like Bruiser at the absolute least. But
Hmm.
whenever I started this game, I played Fighter, like that was the first class I tried because that's normally what I like in like MMOs and stuff. But Fighter as a start is much different than Fighter when you actually like start playing the game and get good gear on because you start like light armor and stuff like that, and it was really hard to get going. And I mean, obviously, I didn't really like I said I saw somebody playing it on Twitch, but I didn't really watch it much. So most of me was going in blind and just trying to figure it out myself. And I was like, okay, this just feels really horrible. I just don't like fighter. So I swapped over to barbarian, and I played barbarian for a while until I started getting more into it, and I watched Orlanthi play, and Orlanthi was like. He was like the Dark and Darker streamer of like the community. Like now you have people like Repose and Jay, but back then it was like Orlanthi was the streamer and he played fighter. And I watched him and I was like, that looks really fun. And I gave fighter another try, and that's when I got into playing it more.
I gotcha. So, were you always like a sword and shield kind of fighter, or did you like do Slayer for a minute, or long sword, or is it just kind of like the front line
I
shield fighter?
Yeah, I mean honestly, whenever I first started, I pretty much copied directly what Orlanthi did. I was playing like Halberd Pavis for my entire time pre-early access. Early access came out, and then I swapped over to doing like Falchion Heater Shield. And then there was one wipe, like the original wipe that Ruins came out as the trios map. I was doing Slayer a lot because it was really really strong back then. But primarily, yeah, I've just played like Sword and Shield.
I gotcha. So, do you mostly play in like you're mostly known for like your trios content, right? Have you
Mhm.
always just played like that, like in trios, like pretty much since the start of Dark and Darker?
Yeah, I mean, I've dabbled in solos a little bit here and there, but just how the game works and balance and everything, I don't particularly like solos that much. I think because no matter what you do, there's always going to be something you're really really weak to, like matchup wise, and when you fight it, it just doesn't feel very good. So I've tended to stay in trios where I feel like even if your class has weaknesses, you can make up for it with your teammates.
I gotcha. That's interesting. So, what was kind of your team comp? And well, okay, that's kind of a later question, I guess. So do you have guys that you like regularly play with?
Yeah, I've pretty much, for the most of my time playing the game, yeah. It started off being like, it was just the friends I got into the game that I played with for the playtest and the beginning of early access, and then it moved into, as I played more and it became more serious, rather like, me competing, like being a better player or streaming wise, I started meeting more people through there, like Apollo or Pashi that I played with. So now, even then, as it's moved on and I've gotten different people throughout my time playing, yeah, for the most part, I've had like a static 3 or 4 people that I would play with.
I gotcha. So like Dark and Darker is like a really hard game, and I think a lot of the appeal for me was like early on, like not a lot of the game was figured out, right? Like
Hmm.
there's I'd say Warlord almost wasn't figured out for like 6 months, like after the game came
Yeah.
out on Blacksmith, right? And that's really weird, right? Like that's kind of cool. Um, uh, pardon me. So like, what was kind of like the moment when you first started playing where you realized that you were kind of getting like pretty good at the game? Because like when everyone first started, like the mobs were like it was one of the few games for me where the mobs were actually like kind of hard, right?
Yeah.
And so part of that appeal to me was like the PvP was actually like really difficult, and the learning curve for that's
Hmm.
like kind of high because there's a lot of them, right?
Yeah, I got you. If I had to really say, honestly, I didn't even. It was like a thing that I didn't even realize because, like I said, like for like playtest 3, 4, and 5, I didn't play that much. Like playtest 3 and 4 combined, I probably had less than 20 hours of playtime. I mean, that's being said, they weren't very long; they're only like a week each. But then on playtest 5, I think that's the one where like me and my friends are like, okay, we're actually gonna play this and try it seriously because I didn't even get into playing High Roller like at all until playtest 4, and I probably played like maybe 5 games of High Roller, so I didn't really get to experience it. But going into playtest
Interesting.
5, we kind of like had the desire to like get into it and like try to be good. And then I remember way back then we killed some of like the best players of the game, it was like Narc, Azdim, and Narcissus. And I
Oh
think that was the
wow.
moment I was like I was like, wait, like we're actually not bad. Like we're actually getting pretty good at this game because we're killing some of these players. And we started like winning just more consistently, and we were running into like the big names, like people like Ken, Azdim, Narc, all of those, and like we were winning, and we weren't just getting steamrolled. So I was like, oh, I guess we're actually pretty good. And even then, I mean, I didn't think I was like, I mean, well, obviously at the time I thought I was really good, but looking back at it now, I don't think I was like, I became like a really, really good player until like a long time after. Because I think back then, the game was like you said, it's like no one really knew what was going on. Like things that people did during like, the first couple playtests and the skill level people were at back then is way different than now that people have had the game much longer. Because if you compare like playtest 5 people, they literally had a month of playtime total across all 5 playtests. Now we've had the game that's been out for over a year. So even like one of the average players now, if you put them back then, they would probably be one of the best players in the game just because of the level of time you've had access to the game for.
Right. I actually had an interesting conversation with Sparky Ikawa. This is not
Hmm.
so much. This is not so much like story based, but basically, I saw this video. I don't know if you've seen it or not on YouTube. It's called like the mechanical arms race that kills video games, and
Hmm.
basically, like this kind of happened in League of Legends. I was like one of the open beta players for that, like way
Yeah.
back in '09. But basically, the long and short of it is that people, as they play the game more, become really skilled at it, and so the game becomes figured out, right? So the mind space of the player is, it's not that the game's like necessarily bad. It's just that like the players have become too good, and so
Yeah.
because of that, they end up killing the game. And so I'm kind of like one of your opinion on this a little bit. I'm just kind of curious as like a because I'm more of a casual player. I'm mostly just playing low
Hmm.
roller because I can actually like kind of 1v2 and that.
Yeah.
But do you think that people become too good at the game? Like because the gear shifted a lot in the last like 2 weeks. Like radically. Um,
Yeah.
so part of me just wonders like, do you think like people become too good at the game in Dark and Dark, and that's part of the problem maybe?
I think it certainly can happen. I think it kind of goes hand in hand with how the game develops because as players get better, generally speaking, games, especially like this, need to put out things that are more and more challenging. If you compare just look at the level of bosses, right? Look at Warlord as long as it was added compared to something like Lich. Literally night and day in terms of the skill level required. Lich is just stand in these circles. Warlord's like do all of this, and then you have things like Wyvern or Spectral Knight or Banshee that just keeps adding more and more and more to the game that is challenging players more and more. And I think you have to find that level of where you're adding new challenging content that players that aren't the best players in the game can learn to do, but it still has to be enough to challenge other players. Or if you're not doing that, then these players that have, effectively figured out the game, whether it's like PvE wise or whatever, still need to have a reason to play the game. But I do think it's possible that that could happen. And at worst, because the thing is, I mean, at the end of the day, this is like, a wipe based game. If you look at any game that has a wipe, like Diablo or Path of Exile, I think are really good examples where, for the most part, you do everything that you want to do. If like you're one of the really like, sweaty players, you do everything you want to do in the first like month of play, and then you don't really do anything else. The game wipes again, and you come back. If you compare this to that, which I think is a really good example of you have to have enough to have those players come back like keep coming back to play. Like, yeah, maybe they're not going to play the entire time throughout the wipe, but that's not really what you expect them to do anyways. You just need to be adding new stuff that gets the players to come back, because like game development, you're never going to be able to outpace your players. Your players are always going to be eating content faster than you can give it to them, right? So you just have to be able to make stuff in the downtime that allows them to come back and have fun again, because there's just no way to do it 24/7, I think. And on the argument of like whether or not they get too good for the game, I think that says more about the development of the game than it does the players. Because if you look at a game like League of Legends, a great example. You said like it's happening all the way back during the beta, but League now is still like a literally one of the biggest esports in the world. So they were able to successfully like give the players a level of challenge consistently that kept bringing them back for more.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like they kept changing like fundamental parts of the game, and I don't really want to talk about League of Legends. I quit that game years ago. I'm like, I'm
Yeah,
clean, man.
yeah.
But I don't know, like even some of the high end players from like I have a couple friends that still play League, and they tell them that like it's annoying to like keep up with the changes because they fundamentally change like parts of it, like the items and stuff, just to like
Hmm.
prevent that player fatigue because that's all people do. But anyway, kind of getting back more to a story narrative. Were there like, going back to kind of like the early days? Were there any like early struggles or challenges that made you like question whether this was the game for you? Like kind of like what kept you going?
Mm. So in terms of challenges, I guess I did have the issue, not in terms of gameplay wise. I mean, there have been a couple of those, but I think the biggest issue is really finding people to play with, because in a game like this, having like trust and team cohesion is literally everything.
Hmm.
If you're playing with people that you can't trust, or they just don't work well together, it's literally a nightmare. Like you can have three of the best players in the game, but if they don't work well together, you're just going to lose most of your games. I've been on the receiving end of that many a times. And as like early access got out and I started streaming more and more, I was trying to play more and more. But my friends, we were on different schedules or whatever, we couldn't really play that much. So I was trying to find new teammates to play with, and there was like a good, I'd say, 2 month period where I was kind of just jumping between people, like playing wherever there was a spot available. And for the most part, I didn't super enjoy it. Because I mean, like I said, I was losing a lot. I'm a very competitive person. One of the main reasons I play is to win, because I love doing that. But I got to the point where I was like, man, I was like, if I can't find people to play with, like, I'm just not going to enjoy this game, because my only other option was to go and play solos. And I've said it many times, like, if I have to play solos over, or like, if I don't have people to play trios with, so I'm forced to play solos, I would rather just not play at all.
Interesting. Um, Interesting. So like early on with the bosses,
Hmm.
did you like go out of your way with your teammates to try to like learn bosses because that's where like the high end loot was, or did you just kind of like go in PvP and just kind of experience what the game was?
I'd say we didn't really try to learn them for a while. Honestly, all the way up until early access, for the most part, we were like terrified to go hell, because that was back when like portals could spawn in boss room and everything,
Hmm.
and getting out was like super inconsistent. It was really easy to die, and I think we went there a couple times and we almost always died, or at least one person did. So up until early access came out, we didn't really have that much experience. And then even after, I went online and like looked at people do the bosses, like, okay, we want to try this. And then I don't even think like, Lich, we got done pretty fast, 'cause I think that's pretty like simple. Like, it doesn't have a lot of mechanics to it. But Ghost King, obviously, the jump was like the big hurdle to learn the
Hmm.
boss. And then it took us a while before we were like fully confident in doing it. Even after we were able to do the jump, we had to, learn how to do the like everything else, kill it in time, like, manage the pools and all that. But for the most part, I've never been somebody that's like pioneering the PvE side, where like, when Wyvern first came out, or Banshee or Spectral Knight, a lot of people were like, "Oh, I want to go kill, I want to get figured out right away." I'm not really like that. I'm more so like, nah, I'll just wait till other people figured out and then I'll go do it after. Because for me, I don't really have a big sense of enjoyment from learning stuff like that. For me, it's more of like a means to an end thing. Just like, okay, that's how I do it. Okay, now I'm gonna go do it, and then I get the loot after.
Interesting. Have you ever picked up the longsword? I've interviewed a few longsword people.
I have. I'm not really a big fan. I'm like, honestly speaking, I'm like a meta chaser to an extent. I don't really like using things that I don't think are very good.
I gotcha. Well, there's been some debate recently whether it's like, because some people who are good with it, like, man, it's scary fighting those guys. Like,
Hmm.
like if they get a riposte and they're good, they can flick their whole mouse on your entire team if they're up close to you and you're dead, right? Even if
Hmm.
you're in plate. But uh, you know, most people don't think the weapon's that good to play, but it's just kind of funny.
Yeah.
So like when I'm trying to remember. I noticed you. I think it was right after Dark and Darker came back, and I think you uploaded a fighter video. It was like rank one fighters fighter guide, right?
Hmm.
And so I think that's when I first started following you. Um, so it kind of seemed like you just wanted to upload that to like kind of like help your friends out. And
Yeah.
then once you got big, you started getting into streaming. Is that kind of what happened, or did you just always plan on like uploading content like that?
So I started streaming first on Twitch, and so okay, one of the main reasons I started to stream because I've streamed like in the past. I streamed Smite, if I don't know if you know what that
Yeah,
is,
yeah,
and I never had like really any success. I mean, I literally was like probably like sub 5 viewers for my entire time streaming it. But one of the honestly, the main reason I got into streaming was I remember because you know that long span between Playtest 5 and early access. I
yes,
remember I was sitting in Discord calls with my friends that I played with then, and we would just be sitting there thinking about like, oh, do you remember this fight? Oh, do you remember this fight? Like this thing we did, and I didn't like none of us had footage recorded, so we couldn't watch it back. And I was like, yo, when early access comes out, I was like, I'm gonna stream. So if there's anything I want to watch back, like I'll have it there to do. And then I started streaming. I don't remember the first day, but I remember when leaderboards first came out
oh yeah,
on
yeah.
the very first early access. I got like 100 viewers because I was rank one for like the first night, and I was like, this is crazy. And I've always had like the logic of if the content's there, you might as well use it. So all of the stuff I was doing on Twitch, I could just take and put right on YouTube like super easily. Like it took me 10 minutes to go clip out a run from Twitch and put it on YouTube. And I was like, okay, well, what if I do other stuff? And I was like, I'll do the guide. And then I made the guide, and I remember thinking, like, I was talking with my friends, it's like, oh, what if this gets like, a couple hundred views, and then end up getting like 20,000? And I was like, that is crazy.
Hmm.
Also, for the time, and on like, this is like not gonna come as any surprise to anybody like, that's watched me for a long time. I like attention, I do, and that's like what I like. Seeing the views go up, seeing the numbers go up, it's fun. I won't lie there, and that's part of the reason I did it. That's why like guide videos, tier lists, stuff like that. That always gets people watching them because I mean, at the end of the day, even if like content creation isn't like my main goal, I can still realize like, this is like good to upload because people are going to like this. And early on like that, I did think I was one of the best players and I was like, I think my guide's probably going to be one of the best guides out there. And also there weren't very many people doing it other than me because Orlanthe wasn't streaming at the time because Orlanthe had to leave for school and stuff, so he like kind of
Mm.
stepped away from like the dark and darker scene and the content creation scene. So I was like, well, there's no one else there, so somebody needs to take his spot. And I was thinking it was going to be me at the time.
Wasn't it?
Obviously, it
Okay.
didn't come out that crazy, but
Wasn't Orlanthe like one of the top barbarian players back in the day? He was like on the leaderboards like number one for a minute there with his team. I don't
I
remember.
maybe like maybe super early on. I know whenever I started watching, he only ever played fighter, but I didn't really start watching him until playtest 4 or 5. So
There,
anything that happened prior could have been.
I know in season one there was like a crazy barb player that was basically just dominating everyone.
Hmm.
I don't remember his name. I thought it might have been Orlando. I don't remember. I just know like there's always like the two like the top three people top of mind for me are just like Repose, Jay Griffith, and then recently Skinny P because that man's an animal at PvP, like actually disgusting. Um, but anyway, so like let's see here. I kind of already asked that question. So like does how does the world of Dark and Darker resonate with you? Is there like a particular like character or type of like battle or like atmosphere that kind of keeps you immersed, or is it more of just like the thrill of battle that kind of just keeps you coming back?
I mean, I love the fantasy aspect to it. Fantasy games are some of my favorite things ever. I mean, just the fantasy genre, really. Novels, anime, games. That's like probably the one thing I can continuously like gravitate towards, no matter what. And then outside of that, just like the concept of delving a dungeon, fighting people, swords, magic, that type of thing. Literally, it's just that is like my favorite thing ever. One of the biggest games I've ever been into in my life was Skyrim,
Mm.
and that's kind of exactly what I like when I first started playing this. That's kind of the stuff like Skyrim, like Dark Souls, that type of thing. That is what I felt in this game, and that's I think definitely one of the biggest reasons I got into it. And then as for like one specific character, fighter is probably the one. I love the versatility of the class, and I just like I said, I've always loved playing like frontline, like tanky classes. That's just been my favorite thing in every game I've played. And so like I kind of just after I really learned how to play the class and like figured out what it did, I kind of fell right in.
I gotcha. So if you could tell somebody new about what makes this game special, like what would you say to them?
I think it's just like it's the difficulty of the challenge and overcoming it. What feels so good. The same like enjoyment you get out of beating a hard game like a Souls game or something, that is the exact same experience I get in this game. It's so rewarding to when you finally like learn everything and you start winning. It just feels better than anything else in the world.
I gotcha. So I kind of want to go back to a little bit of like your team comp a little bit. Um,
Hmm.
so for like a long time, obviously Barbarian Buffball was kind of, you know, like the meta for almost
Yeah.
like what, a year, 8 months at
Yeah.
least.
Yeah.
So kind of talk to me, like you said you jumped like in the early days between like different people and different team comps. So like how would you go about like recruiting people? Because like are you more of like a follower? Are you more like a team assembler, like kind of a leader? Like kind of just walk me through then like your character progression through the early days through now.
Hmm. So generally speaking, honestly, I really can't even remember how half my teams came together. I do think I was definitely more of the assembler, right? I mean, some of like my best teammates I've ever had, like Poshy Pop, for example, I found him by complete chance. Dark and Darker had some like random tourney months ago. It was like a kill race effectively, and I met him through one of my other like somebody asked me to play, and the person that asked me to play like they had also asked Poshy, and I met him through that. And then going forward to that next swipe, I needed a new teammate. I was like, "Hey, Pasha, you want to play?" Because I know you played cleric at the time, and I hate playing without a cleric, so I got him. And then I found other people just randomly through either like LFGing or whatever, and then I just put them together. And you just kind of throw something at a wall and see what sticks. And whenever people start playing together and they mesh really well together, that just feels pretty good. And other than that, I think generally speaking, most of the teammates I've met are just friends of friends. Whether it's somebody's watching my Twitch stream, or I met them through another player I know. But that's pretty much how it's ended up. That's how I know like people like Apollo, Pashi, Papi Chulo, Mel, like all of them are just pretty much I met them through a friend of a friend, and then just, hey, you want to play? And it's pretty much that simple.
I gotcha. So, like in the early days, did you guys have like any team rivals or kind of like like arch nemesises or like team friends or anything like kind of like that?
Oh yeah, I've definitely had a lot of people because you know me, so I'm not the most liked person in the community. So I would definitely think there's a lot of people out there. I wouldn't call them rivals necessarily, but there were definitely people I ran into a lot and that I wanted to beat more than I wanted more than anything. I hated losing to them for sure.
Sure. Can you talk about
There,
maybe a
there were.
couple of those people and kind of like what sparked that controversy? Well, not controversy, just like maybe like
Mhm.
aggressive sportsmanship.
I mean, I think if I had to like pick like one of the biggest ones, it would probably be I don't know. I think I'd throw Retzi's name out there just because like out of like between me and him there was like no respect. It was just I talk shit about him, he talks shit about me, just back and forth. And that's really what it was. Like that those players we just came down to, we just like talk so much trash to each other that when we would run into them, like I hated losing because I don't like losing anyways, but against a player that you know is gonna talk trash about you if they beat you, it's so bad. And it usually stems off the back of I never thought he was that good. He never thought I was that good. And like I said, there are a lot of players like that. But he's probably one of like the most consistent ones throughout the entire time.
Yeah.
And then there are other players like if I had to throw another name, I'd probably say Juye, just because there was like a time where I think we kind of respected each other, but I always thought he was like a buff ball crutch because he only ever played Barbarian and stuff like that. But yeah, there were a lot of players that I really didn't want to lose to.
So can you kind of? So I'm not really familiar with these two players. Can you kind of like walk me through like what they are and like kind of like what they're known for a little bit of context?
Well, I mean, put it right where it's Retzi is like the worst version of Repose. They both play Rogue. I guess
Ah,
Repose was a lot more known than Retzi. And then Rogue was the main thing he played, and then other than that, he's like played the stuff like Wizard. He's pretty much kind of like sat around Wizard and Rogue for the most time, and he's been playing the game for a very very long time. And I don't think he was considered that good up until I'd say probably playtest 2 or 3. It was. I mean, it was sometime. It was sometime after the playtest. Because before that, I'd never even heard of him. But then he started like, I guess, picking up a lot of traction. A lot of players thought he was good, or maybe they already did, and I just wasn't that paying that much attention. But then Juye, on the other hand, he came around the wipe that if you remember when Clayster was playing, it was like Clayster, Mazology, and Maka, which are his teammates now.
hmm.
The wipe after that, they started playing together because Clayster stopped playing the game. And he was just playing like Barbarian Buff Ball back during like +3 all War Maul meta.
Oh yeah.
And Yeah, and everybody thought they were like insane because I don't know how long you've been playing or if you remember, but there was a wipe that they didn't have leaderboards for. It was only like a month and it was like a month and a half wipe or something. It was really short, but almost no one played the game then, and they were one of the only teams playing. And I remember everybody thinking, or like everybody saying, like, "Wow, these guys are like the best players in the game. They're so insane." But to me, it was like there's no one else playing, so it's not really like they have that much like contention. And I mean, it's kind of like a one-sided bitterness of I don't like seeing players that I don't think are that good have a bunch of people say like these are the best players in the game because I feel like it's kind of disrespectful to the actual good players. And yeah, that's kind of where it stemmed from. Just
I
my
gotcha.
own opinions.
Do you remember the first time that you like had an artifact battle, or like the first time you saw one? Because like
Yes.
kind of walk me through then, kind of like walk me like in your mind, like your thought process, like in the context around that battle, and kind of like what happened there.
So this is actually a story I remember very very well. Playtest 5, the last game of the playtest before it went down. I spawned in, and this is back when like when VoIP was like you could VoIP in the lobby.
Hmm.
And I spawn in, and I know Narek because I've known him from a previous game. And he calls my name, and I turn around, and it's Narek and Narcissus standing there. And Narek has Famine and Life After Death, and Narcissus has Cinder. And they're both just sitting there staring at me, and like we're all freaking out because we've never had an artifact before. I've like seen one, but I've never fought one. I've never had one myself, and Cinder was the one I wanted to use the most. And I remember we start the game, and like the lobby doesn't even fully fill because we queued like a minute before servers go down, so the lobbies don't fill anymore, or like before they closed or whatever. And we spawn in, one of like the little random coffin rooms on crypts, like like the ones that have like little crawl space in between them. We spawn in that room, and I open the door and look, and I see both of them right there. We spawn side by side, and I remember like the fight. So the fight happened, and I didn't realize it at the time. But their cleric had left the game to go get screenshots for leaderboards because that's what they were doing back then. And we chased them from like that coffin room all the way to prison. And in the process of killing Narc, because he jumped in between three of us, I killed my cleric. I swung straight through my cleric to kill him. So we killed Narc and we killed Narcissus. And then I picked up the cinder, I held it in my hand, I killed one zombie, and the game immediately shut down. And that was the first time I'd ever fought artifacts and used them. And it was just the greatest feeling of all time. And that was the last experience I had with Dark and Darker between the playtest and early access.
Wow, that's kind of crazy right there. Like I
Yeah.
remember, I got him playtest 4, and everyone was garbage back then. But me and my teammates, we third party like Kin Kanabi in like
Hmm.
I think he was playing somebody like Pose maybe, and I looked, I'm like, wait a minute, that guy's led in like the top 10 leaderboards. That's crazy.
Yeah.
But that's kind of cool though, because I think artifacts are really an interesting aspect in this game. Like they're so rare,
Hmm.
right? Like they're
Yeah.
if you see one, it's like wow, that's like that's an event. You just became the boss. You just became the
Yeah.
dungeon
Yeah. Yeah.
boss. Do you think that they're like too rare, maybe, or like too expensive?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have some pretty like big opinions on this game's economy as a whole, but I do think so. Artifacts are like really, really fun to see and to fight, right? I don't think they're fun to fight. I think they're fun to win a fight against or win a fight with. But a lot of the artifacts, if I had to like really pick like two, I would go like Famine or Viola. If you fight them, it just feels so one-sided because like Famine completely cuts all healing, Viola
Mm.
just a huge slow that I think they're too strong to be more common. So if they were to be made more common, I would like them to be nerfed down a little bit because I think having like these really because even if they were nerfed, like they're still really strong items. Having these really strong items that you see more often is way more fun than having insanely broken items that you hardly ever see. Because with these items being so strong and worth so much, there's a lot of really bad culture around them. Like certain like ratting rogues, sniping like that, and everything that makes it so people really don't like running them that much. Because if you do, like you said, you're pretty much instantly you have a target on your back from everybody in the game. And teaming isn't a thing anymore, but it used to be like if you run them and people would see it, especially in like solos or something, you would literally have the entire lobby running at you trying to kill you. So I would like them to be like some like middle ground between them being way too expensive to where it's like they're still decently expensive, but like maybe an average player over the wipe could build up enough to like run one at the end. How it is right now, you could pick any random artifact and they're probably 200,000 gold. An average player is not going to build that much gold up over a wipe to ever get to use one. So unless they get like a lucky drop from a boss or something, they're probably never going to see one. And I don't really like that. I don't like closing off what is arguably the most fun content in the entire game from 95% of your player base.
Sure. I mean, it's rare enough that like it makes it worth it learning the bosses and kind of like going through that
Hmm.
like player progression arc, right? Because like Dark Souls 3, I couldn't beat the tutorial guy after like an hour, because you have to it
Yeah.
forces you to level up. I feel like this game does that if you want to experience in-game content like that,
Hmm.
and that's interesting. So if you had to pick one like outstanding moment of like legendary battle, that first story you told was pretty interesting about the end of playtest 4.
Hmm.
Since the game came out, has there been like a legendary battle that stood out to you that you still think about, like this is why I still play this game?
If there's one that immediately jumps to mind, and it's I don't even remember what playtest it was, or not playtest, sorry, I don't remember which early access wipe it was. Actually, no, I do. It was Gold Gear. It was Gold Gear after they added Crypts back in, and I was playing with one of my longtime friends. And I was playing with Pashi, and we were doing zero to hero from like literally like base kit characters to high roller, and I was running like some super mid kit with a halberd. And earlier that day, before we started Zero Hero, we had died to Retzi, Promos, and Smokin, who was like a friend that played with them back then. He doesn't really play much anymore. But we had died to them, and we ran into them later that day. And I was, like I said, I was using Halberd. Halberd is really bad at this time. Like, no one used it. And I invis potted, and I hit like a crazy, like, Halberd right click double kill into killing the last one. And like I said, we were in like blues pretty much and like maybe like a purple weapon, but our kits were worth less than 1,000 gold each, and we killed them all in like full bis. And I think that was just probably like such like a fun moment for me because like the fight wasn't even like remotely close really, but it was just like I felt like I played it so well in terms of like using the halberd, like the right click and everything, which is generally speaking never used, and I was just really really fun.
I gotcha. Has there been like a favorite build on fighter that you've enjoyed at one time or another?
Oh, absolutely. So there was a build I ran not last wipe, but the wipe before that, where it was pretty much just like the wall build. It's full tank. I ran no Swift. I would run like all like the shield perks and taunt and second win, and I would just go for like 75% PDR, 75% MDR, and you're super slow and you can't catch anyone. But you just kind of stand there and you were just like a space maker for your team and no one gets to go past you. And I love that build so much. That one or like the max MDR chain lightning fighter build where you go like 85% MDR before they nerfed it and you just have two wizards chain you with a Pavis. That build is really really fun too. I love those like builds that like because the thing is like at first glance they look really simple. It's like, oh, you're just like you're just tanky, like anybody can do that. But it's like you realize you have no mobility and you have to position really really well. And while you might not actively be doing much, like you're not getting the kills or anything, but you are just like a really big like anchor for the team that they can play around and other people have to avoid.
I gotcha. That's kind of funny. Kind of turning the tables a little bit. Has there ever been like a defeat that like left a mark on you and like that you remember that kind of like really stung
Mm.
and like kind of like reshaped how you thought about maybe like the meta or your character?
I think I don't know if there was a specific one, but there were definitely actually no, that is a lie. There is one very specific one I can think of. So this is when they first added back in plus 3 all after early access came out. And I remember playing with my friends. We were have like our gear was like crazy. Like we were in like 20 30K kits. And this is within the first week of wipe. Like our gear was insane. And we spawned in on Coliseum and we walked like we spawned in, we walk out, we go to the right, and this is when Buffball Barb is just first becoming back into the meta, and Chain Lightning Barb is just being figured out.
Hmm.
And I remember walking. It's underneath where the skeleton mage is, where it's like like you have the stairs that go all the way down, and the mage is above you, or the res is. And there's the grate that you walk through to go under. And I walked to the front of the grate to like continue walking around the ring, and I see a barb go invis. And he goes in. I hear the roar, and I see him go invis. In about half a second, he's on the grate in front of me, and I'm like, okay, it's a Warmaw barb. I'm gonna hold him on the grate here because that's the correct play. You don't let him get onto the opens because if you do, then he can't swing his Warmaw. And I block him there, And then I hear chain lightning, chain lightning, chain lightning on the barb 3 times, and all 3 of us are instantly dead to Lindstrom, Nevix, and Smifu chain lightning their barb. And this is me being in like a 40% MDR, like 180 HP kit, and we just instantly got wiped like that. And I remember just sitting there looking at that, like, and that is like genuine. I was like, why am I playing fighter? Like, why did that just happen? Because this barb is like max MR, max PDR, like 200 HP, and I'm just looking at my stats that are just so much worse offensively and defensively. And I was like, what am I doing playing fighter? And I'm pretty sure shortly after that, I started playing Barbarian for the rest of that wipe. Because that was just like that was the most one-sided fight I had ever had. And like yeah, shortly they like nerfed stuff like Chain Lightning and everything after that. But that fight was just so one-sided. It felt like somebody in like full BIS legendaries fighting people in Squire kit. That is how bad it was.
Interesting. Um, how does your playstyle like evolve, or how did your playstyle like evolve over time? Were there any like skills or attributes that you like needed to change around on your fighter, or like
Mm,
have you like because early on you were like a like a tanky you obviously shift with the meta, but has generally your approach to your playstyle evolved over time, and kind of walk me through that.
I'd say like generally I haven't changed my playstyle too much, like disregarding the meta, because like you said, for the most part you kind of follow the meta, you do what's good at the time. I would say like the one thing I've consistently done throughout is I've tried to play like my playstyle. I've tried to make whatever build works for my playstyle. Like last wipe, I think it was last wipe, whichever wipe Druid was first added. I was kind of having issues playing fighter. I felt like it wasn't that good, so I started looking around and I came up with the buff duration build. That is back when like if you remember, buff duration became like a
Yeah.
really big thing. There was like buff duration cleric, buff duration demon, and I came up with that for fighter. I was like, okay, I could just stack like all this will gear and all this buff duration, and I can go for taunt and second wind and have these really, really long lasting abilities that make my character a lot better because I'm just getting so many free stats. And I've had a couple things like that throughout where I've just been trying to like, how best can I make fighter like feel viable in a meta where it feels like there are so many characters that are better than it. And there have been a few instances where I was like, I just can't do it, and I just play like Demon Form Warlock or I play Barbarian or something. But for the most part, I think I've always tried to figure it out. And the one skill I think that has progressively evolved over time is blocking. Blocking in this game is inconsistent at best, but once you get really, really good at it, there are some fights that just feel you can make them go from feeling entirely one-sided in their favor to one-sided in your favor. And I do think a lot of people kind of just write off blocking because of how bad it is, other than like, oh, blocking arrows or stuff like that. But once you get really good with it in melee, it can be like the deciding factor very, very easily.
Right. Like the thing that people don't I think appreciate about this game is how tight the hitboxes are. Like you can take
Hmm.
a rapier and put it like next to someone's ear, and it's not, you know what I mean? It's like it's accurate
Yeah.
for the most part, especially. And so it's kind of weird that the blocking doesn't work when everything else is so good.
Hmm.
There's slight lag with the arrows and stuff, depending on the server and your ping. But have you ever crafted like your own lore or backstory for your character or guild that influenced kind of how you play?
No, not really. I've never been like super big into that type of thing, like of like the lore or anything. Like, I mean, I'll look at lore of like games that are already established, but creating it myself, not really. I like reading stuff that already exists. However, I find that my own creativity is whether I'm just bad at it or I find it like corrupted to an extent because I've read so much fantasy stuff that whenever I start coming up with something, I just inherently realize I'm like, oh, I'm just pulling it from this, I'm just pulling it from that. Whether that's actually true or I've just read so much that whenever I come up with something, I can always relate it to something else. So I generally try to stay away from that side. I prefer more like consuming it than creating it.
I gotcha. So kind of talk to me a little bit about like some trios. So like, what kind of goes into like assembling a team for like high end adventuring, delving into the dungeon for like HR, PvP, and bossing, right? Like I assume that like you kind of go in, with because I've seen your videos. You have like 100K kits and all the crazy YouTube stuff, right? Kind of like what goes
Hmm.
into just basically like what do you need in a team? Like what do you look for in people to play with to get to that level of like cohesion like you talked about earlier?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, the biggest thing, no matter what, completely ignoring skill or anything like that, is trust. You have to be able to trust your teammates to do what they have to do, right? Because if you don't trust your teammates, it automatically, regardless of how they actually play, it makes you play worse because in the back of your mind, you're always thinking, Are they going to mess up? Are they going to throw a fight? Things like that. But when you can trust them 100%, you can focus entirely on playing what you want to do. Also, one of the big things it comes down to is whoever the in-game leader is, whoever the shot caller is, if it's you or if it's them, if you don't trust them or they don't trust you or whatever, if you're making a call or they're making a call, there are people going to be like things that happen where people second guess it, where they don't follow the call, they do their own thing, and the moment someone doesn't follow a call, it automatically just everything is gone because now instead of having three people doing the wrong thing, you have maybe three people doing different wrong things, or you have some people doing the right thing, some people doing the wrong thing. But I don't know if you've ever heard this, but generally speaking, it is better for in a game for three people to do the wrong thing than it is for two people to do the wrong thing and one people to do the right thing. As a team, you want every decision to be made together to the extent of like you're all following them together. So that is like the number one thing I look for in players. It's like, can I trust the people I'm playing with? Like, am I confident that they are going to be able to do what I need them to do? And then when it gets down to other things, it just comes down to, are they running like the right level of gear? Because running like, cheap kits is fine as long as everyone's doing it. But if I'm saying like, okay, I'm putting on really good gear or something, and then I put on 30K worth of gear and they go in with greens and blues, that's like 2K gold. I mean, that just comes like, I mean, like what are we doing? Like, I feel like I'm just wasting my time here. And then that plays into, do the players want to win? Because generally speaking, if you're queuing up HR trios, whether it's just to have fun or whatever, like that's fine. But when I'm doing it, I'm like, I'm queuing up because I want to win. I'm not just there to waste my time. So do these people want to win as much as you do? I think that is almost as important as trust, is having that desire to either win, or when you're early on building a team, the desire to improve and get to the point where you can win. I think a lot of players lack that, and it's very, very apparent because whenever the easiest way to get better is losing and looking at what you did wrong and trying to improve on that. And the people that don't have that drive to win, they don't have that drive to get better, is when they lose, they don't want to talk about it. They just want to immediately go to the next one and just kind of forget that it happened. And I've run into players like that many times, and I think those are generally best avoided. But for the most part, it's just, I think having trust in your teammates, and then in like terms of rather game stuff, it's building the right comp. If you want a boss and you're learning the boss, having a cleric is generally the best. If you really want to, you can run like Holy Purification. That makes most of the bosses very, very easy. Clears ads on Warlord and Lich, clears the bats on Ghost King. It kind of eliminates one of the hardest parts of it. And then just like I said, having people that are willing to put in the time. If you're gonna learn a boss, okay, can we go like everybody go watch a YouTube video to see how it's done? They don't just go in blindly. It's like having everybody contribute 100% is probably how I would sum it all up. You have to have everybody willing to put in the time and effort to win, basically.
I gotcha. It seems like that would take like a long time to find people, and just kind of like, especially if you're like you don't really have a teammate or friends to play the game with, because like I think in like Playtest 5 they released, it was like almost half the player base was solo, and I bet you it might be higher now. I don't know. They don't really release that, I guess, because of the whole lawsuit thing. But it seems like that would take a long time to kind of find people, and people kind of get frustrated with the game. Like it's end of wipe or something, or the wipe's too long. So it, like, how do you find people that are like kind of willing to go to that level? Like, you just
Honestly, it's really difficult. I won't deny it. I think that is probably the hardest part of this game, not including obviously the gameplay itself, is finding people to go into trios is incredibly difficult. I mean, there are like, various like LFG servers and stuff like that you can go through. But generally speaking, if you like really, really want to do it, other than like through those LFG servers, you just kind of have to just queue up random and try to find people that you like. It doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm specifically looking for competitive teammates. Just queue up and like, turn your VoIP on, talk to your teammates, find people that you enjoy talking to, seeing how it works, and then it's like, oh, I queued him, found this guy, he's cool, I'll invite him and play some games together. If you guys are like working together, or you're having fun or whatever, like that's fine. Then maybe you play together in another day or whatever, and then you just keep doing that until you find like a decent amount of players. Or you just, something you really can do is if you're only solo, you can just go solo and try to like queue solo HR a lot, try to get high on the leaderboards and invite other people's or message or other people on there and message them. I don't know how consistent that is, but I don't know how consistent the other method is either. Truthfully speaking, I've never had to do it myself. I've always had, like, even when I was in an area where I was kind of like lacking on teammates, I still had better areas to go. Because back then there used to be something called a top 100 Discord. And it was pretty much the top 100 players on the leaderboards all get invited to a Discord, and you could like LFG through there and stuff. but finding teammates is hard. I'm not going to deny that, and it's definitely something that's a very time-consuming process. Generally speaking, the best way is just going to be to queue up and talk to your teammates and see if you like them, and just go from there. There's no real like tried and true method to do it. It's just trying to see what works.
Yeah, I do remember there was a bit of controversy with that Discord, wasn't there? Like 6 months ago or something, where like you basically it was hard to find like good matchups, and so people would just queue into each other with high gear, and like people were upset that like people would give gear back or something.
Yeah, that
Um,
was a that was a that did happen, but that was a different Discord. That was the
oh,
like the Gold Scrim Discord.
okay.
Hmm.
Yeah, I feel like Arena kind of solves that. If you just have like gear that you find, like I actually like Arena. I think it's interesting the way they have
Yeah.
it. It gives you a reason to go in the dungeon, and
Hmm.
it makes me wonder like SDS Vision is interesting. Uh,
Yeah.
it kind of just seems like I don't know, like a little frustrated with the game where it's like all my gear that I
Yeah.
had got re-rolled like
Yeah.
twice. It's like, bruh.
Hmm.
Anyway,
Yeah. Or no, go ahead. Sorry.
never mind. I'm not really here to talk about balance.
Yeah.
I'm more here to get up a story. So kind of like looking back,
Yeah.
like what would you tell your younger self about your journey in Dark and Darker?
Um. If I really had to say one thing, I would probably say focus on content creating more. I mean but that's like not really like Dark and Darker related. I would say just have fun. Don't take it as seriously. Just have fun. And enjoy the time and like enjoy the time you spend. Because I truthfully believe I think the early times in a game are some of the most fun you have. I think the more you play the game, the less fun you get overall. You just kind of get into a cycle of you play it so much that like it turns into a routine. Like you don't even know why you're playing it at this point. Are you still enjoying it? Like maybe sometimes, but I believe like the game first came out or like early playtests and or early access or whatever, when I was playing the game like 10 hours a day, I was having so much fun like every single day. And I would say just probably value that time a little bit more. Don't take it quite as seriously. Like if you win, great, but just enjoy what you're doing.
I gotcha. So if your journey in the game were like a story arc, like how would you describe the current chapter you're in?
Mm. I would say it's probably post climax. We're like nearing the resolution. I think just because I think this game is probably getting to a point where pretty soon it's gonna have like a defining moment of this game's either dead or this game's gonna succeed. I think I think arguably the climax is probably Steam release, just to see like how many players came out to play the game, how everybody liked it, and I think we're really falling off of that now. And leading into next wipe, because it's gonna be here in probably like a month and a half or something, but leading into next wipe, I think that may be the biggest defining factor in this game's lifespan of just, is this game going to succeed or not? Because, I mean, there's no secret. Like, right now, the player base is, we're only on 14K. I checked yesterday and we were on 12K. And, like, yeah, it's the middle of the day right now, so people have, like, jobs at work and stuff. But the game's player base hasn't been very high for a while. And the Steam release was the big thing for them. It's like, Steam release is their excuse for having low player base for a long time because, it's like, oh, when we release on Steam, everybody can just come and play the game. Well, now that cat's out of the bag and you can't re-release it. So how's the game going to go? And I think, not to get too much into balance, but like you mentioned earlier, them constantly dragging their players back and forth on everything they're changing just doesn't sit well with a lot of players. And a lot of those people are just probably not going to play the game again, or at best they come back for another wipe and try it out. But pretty soon this game is going to have to like really make some like definable changes to make the game succeed or fail, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. So kind of like, well, let's kind of sum up your character arc a little bit. So like early on, like you pretty much always played fighter, sword and shield fighter, or halberd pavis, and then you kind of evolved into more of a, frontliner, kind of like an adventurer, kind of going into the dungeon, looking to make wealth and a name for yourself. Like let's say in the Fighters Guild, for instance, right?
Hmm.
You know, you made several friends along the way, kind of like a little bit of a leader slash instructor and maybe the Fighters Guild. And now you're kind of like the old grizzled veteran who, is looking for that like artifact or that, a way to defeat the Lich or, some of this other stuff. Like, how would you want your character to be represented in the novel? Because like, I don't know if you're familiar with Neil Gaiman or not, but he's a pretty like famous fantasy writer, but
Hmm.
he says like fantasy is essentially a story made of lies. You know what I mean? You know, it's all
Yeah.
fictional, but you can make
Hmm.
it really compelling if you use real people and real stories. And one example he gave of this, I mentioned this to Sparky Kawa, was that like say so he wrote a children's book for dragons, right? And
Hmm.
how do I make dragons like remotely relatable? Like it's a thing, right? And so
Yeah.
what he did was he remembered a time when he was bullied as a child, and so he kind of connected that with the dragon in that like say like you know it's not so much that you went and faced the dragon you know and you lost, it's that the dragon is kind of this bully where he like lets you live and you have to go back knowing that
Hmm.
he let you live, right?
Yeah.
And so I think getting player stories and kind of intertwining characters kind of like that, like how would you want your character as this kind of like a sum up of like an old grizzled veteran who is like a lot of people fall into the labyrinth. There's not a bunch of new recruits coming in. Like, how would you want your story to be continued or end?
Mm. Well, I think like just start off. I think my favorite concept of fantasy and what I enjoy the most is like the whole point of things like fantasy, right? It's to live out a reality that you can't, right? It's like to do all these like mystical, magical things that obviously real life you can't do. Like magic's not real. You can't do that. Dragons, they're dead. They don't exist. And that's my favorite part of fantasy is being able to go into these worlds and pretty much live in like where things don't exist, and it's like all this like super fun stuff. So if I had to pick one thing for my character, mm, it's really hard to say. I guess I think like the argument would be, or if I had to really pick one, it's like like have you ever seen like all of these like novels or like anime or whatever where like the hero goes on the journey to kill like the Demon King and then
Mm-hmm.
that's it. You don't see anything after, but then pretty much everything after just goes on to be like a normal life. Like like that's it. You've done everything, and I kind of like that concept of once the job's done, you just have to go on doing like everything like normal. Like that's it. Like like this person who adventured all throughout their entire life to like go through the labyrinth, kill the lich and all this. They taught all these people, but at some point time catches up with you and you just have to sit back and you have to let the next generation take over.
Interesting. Interesting. That's I had not thought about that. That's kind of interesting. No epic end, no final sacrifice. Well, we'll see, we'll see. What lessons from Dark and Darker have like carried into your real life, if any? Would you say like perseverance or like just any major lessons from the game?
Mm, I don't know. I wouldn't. I don't really necessarily know that any have. I think I think how I like carry myself in the game is very similar to real life. In terms of like in-game lessons, I'm not like super in touch with that, so I don't particularly think anything has, honestly.
I gotcha. How do you want to be remembered in the Dark and Darker community? Is there like a legacy or reputation that you want to leave?
Um, nah, I don't really remind. I don't like. I don't really care how people remember me. I just want them to do it. Whether they remember me for hating me, they remember me for liking me, they remember me for being one of the best fighter players, one of the most overrated players. However they want to remember me, that's up to them. I just want them to remember me.
That's kind of funny. Kind of going back to the artifacts a little bit. I kind of want to spend the last few minutes kind of like talking about lore ideas and kind of if you've
Hmm.
had any like ideas that you thought would be kind of cool to add into Dark and Darker, like any bosses or anything kind of like that that maybe you've like theory crapped on for a second.
Hmm. I mean, the biggest thing I think that a lot of people want is like like the black dragon, like Kuma's claw, Kuma's fang, stuff like that. I mean, I think that's what a lot of people want is like have this like big like 10-man raid boss that you go in to fight that has been there's like statues of him all around like the maps he's talked about and like the artifacts, flavor text, and all that. It's like I mean, like the ultimate thing in all of fantasy is like the dragon, right? It's like that's like the big boss. I think everybody like loves the dragons. Like when you think fantasy, generally speaking, dragons one of the first thing that jumps to your mind, and they've like alluded to it through so many different things. Like we've done all our quests, we did the lich and the ghost king and the warlord and all that. It's like I want the dragon, the wyvern, or the ice wyvern. That's not a dragon. That's a joke. I want the dragon. Give me the big dragon.
Interesting. I kind of wondered like what role he would play. So like I've like read most of the like adventure text.
Hmm.
I've read all the artifact text, and it kind of seems to indicate that like, have you seen Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood at all? Are you
Yeah,
familiar with that? So like, do you
yeah, yeah.
remember what was the dude's name? Hosenheim's the little guy in a
The
bottle. I don't
dwarf.
remember.
Yeah, the dwarf in the flask.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think the story is kind of a little bit like that. For the people that might not have seen the show, basically there was this ancient civilization that like had this king. They were powerful with magic and this and that. And from what I can kind of piece together through the Wikipedia, um, is that like this king gave this court wizard. That's the Lich, right? He's immortal, like in Dark and Darker.
Hmm.
Had this spell that he wanted for something, right? And so I think the Ghost King represents like this king, and so it kind of parallels a little bit, I think, of the of the Full Metal Alchemist, this ancient civilization, and basically
Hmm.
this Lich, court wizard did what the king wanted, but there was some like, obviously something went wrong, right? So I think lore wise, it's interesting because like the labyrinth changes a lot. Like every time you go in, it's random which modules you get, or not much modules, but like it's like the maps are randomized, right? And so
Hmm.
I kind of feel like the story is the king did something, and then the lich, like maybe the magic that the wizard did was to become a lich and absorb all the souls of the people to power himself up, right? But then there's the question
Hmm.
of why is the warlord and the ghost king still there, right? Like, are they bound into the lich? Like, kind of what's going on there? And I was just thinking of like the Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, plot line. Like that kind of reminded me of that a little bit, right? It's all about power,
Yeah.
right? And the more people that die to the labyrinth, the more powerful they become. But it's interesting. Like if you look at the warlord, right? He still has like a little semblance of honor, I guess.
Hmm.
And what's interesting about the artifacts that you mentioned is like Kuma, like Kuma's Fang and Claw are from this black dragon. Like, how does he integrate with all this? But if you look at like Fulgor, right, the flavor text, it's one of the only artifacts that says it's like a pure artifact. Like, like it's not made from like any dark magic or anything. It's like one of the like the good artifacts, quote unquote.
Hmm.
I think Viola is like neutral or whatever. But it's just interesting that like I think only the Warlord drops Fulgor, and maybe I don't remember. Maybe one other one does. But it's just interesting that like you know you have all these different artifacts and all these different things kind of going on all together. I think there's an interesting story to tell there of where like you can have like this new labyrinth's discovered, and so this whole town's full of adventures, right? And you
Hmm.
can get a bunch of players that player stories that kind of come in and like how they interact, the mystery of the dungeon, right? Like one thing I've
Yeah.
not figured out is like how do you solve death, right? So I actually talked to Odin. Funny enough, I queued up with Odin one night at two in the morning a couple of months ago because I was really sick, couldn't sleep, and so he actually made a lore video on like kind of what happened, and it was actually really well done, surprisingly. It's like a little 5 minute video, and he had an interesting way of dealing with that, right? Like do you go into the dungeon if you die? Do you get revived because it's fantasy, or do you like people just barely survive and come out, right? It's an interesting problem to solve.
Hmm.
Actually, I'm just kind of yapping at this point. Like kind of like what do you think about the story and kind of like based on the lore that you've seen, what do you think the story is?
I definitely think it could be like something similar to you like that, like what you're saying of, there's like this king that gave this wizard something and the wizard like the spell went wrong and it killed all these people, destroyed the whole kingdom, which is like, the ruins of the Forgotten Castle. And all these people were trapped, like bound to the labyrinth. Like, their souls are bound down within it. There's the Dark Ritual Circle, which is the name of the boss room. So they're doing something down there very clearly. And then you said like, you have these things like the Warlord that play in, and it's like, where exactly does this come in? Plus he drops Fulgor, which you said is like one of the good artifacts, and you could make the story of, they could have been doing something to try to protect their kingdom from the invading Warlord, and the Warlord had or they were evil and the Warlord was the one coming to like stop it, like to prevent that, and he didn't get there in time. So him and like all of his other army, like like the guards he has, like the royal guardsmen, were all corrupted in the process. But the one sword that he has left behind that wasn't corrupted was Fulgor. That's like the holy sword or whatever. Because I mean, truthfully speaking, it really does look like one, and it strikes lightning. That's pretty holy to me. But there's a lot of like spins you could put on this, I think, and it's definitely pretty interesting. So like when you get into like the whole concept of like how do you die in the dungeon and come back out? Like, oh, are you the same person? Are you a different character? Is it the curse of the dungeon. Anyone that goes in is cursed to be or to remain and always go back in. Because you could look at it that way. It's like we have no option to go anywhere else. We can only go back into these dungeons. Um, but then obviously you'd have to think about stuff like the goblin caves or ice caves and stuff like that. But it is what it is. But I definitely think there's a lot of interesting lore ways you could put into it. And I think it would be way more fun if they would add more lore into the game. Like I think they mentioned before, because there is definitely a story to tell there, and just based on through the quest text, they give some of the story through that. Things like the woodsman's daughter, or I think it's the woodsman or the leather,
Yeah.
somebody's daughter, that turns out to be the banshee or whatever. It's definitely pretty interesting.
I didn't realize that was the Banshee. Is that what's like implied? Like she went missing? Because I know the Goblin Merchant
I think
mentions
I'm
it.
pretty sure it is. I think so. I could be wrong.
Interesting. Actually, I haven't heard that theory, but I do know that the armor is an interesting one as well because it's indicated he might have been like a coward or like he did something really bad. Like he might know why the ruins and the crypts are haunted, right? So it's kind of definitely interesting. But yeah, there's a lot I think that can be done with the story. It's just kind of a shame that there's not more lore to it.
Hmm.
Um, Interesting. All right. Well, I appreciate it, Todd. I mean, I don't really have any other questions. If you have anything else to kind of comment or say, or any other lore ideas that you might find kind of interesting.
I mean, I do think just one thing is to a certain extent, it's the same way, you have the Souls game lore where it's not really given to you. You have to find bits and pieces through all of these random item descriptions and boss text and all of this stuff. I do think it's kind of fun to have to try to piece stuff together, and you pretty much the players are allowed to tell their own story of their own idea of what happened throughout the game. And I definitely think that is kind of enjoyable rather than just having it given to you outright. But, teach their own.
I got you. Well, this has
Hmm.
been really fun. I appreciate you giving me about an hour of your time. I would definitely love to do this again and maybe get your feedback once I get a first draft or two. I'm
Hmm.
actually going to be talking to Skinny Pete later and Lord Collector. I think that those are going to be kind of interesting characters. I'm looking forward to
Hmm.
Lord Collector as well. But I really appreciate it, man.
All right, yep. I'll catch you later, man. Peace.
All right, thanks.